All right, welcome everybody. Thanks for sticking with us as we were navigating those first few minutes. Like I mentioned, thank you for being here today for our Northeast Renewable Diesel Working Group. This is our fourth Renewable Diesel Working Group session of this series. We started these sessions back in May and are getting to the point of wrapping it up. It's been really exciting to see how many people have joined these conversations. Peggy and I have talked to, I want to say like over 100 people over the last 12 months, not including all you folks in this room, but just joining conferences around the Northeast, talking about renewable diesel, one-on-one stakeholder calls, meeting with fleets, doing a Massport site visit. I feel like we've sort of been all over and touched on all elements of renewable diesel. And yeah, we're excited to be here today. So touching on the agenda real quick, we're gonna do some brief introductions in the chat as always. We're gonna do a recap of some of the initial sessions that we've talked about as we sort of wrap up and move folks towards hopefully an implementation phase. Talk about that a little bit more. We'll do an overview of some best practices for running a successful pilot program for alternative fuels, renewable diesel specifically. These are some of the best practices that we've heard from fleets that have run pilot programs from conversations that we've had over the past 12 months. And of course, as we're going through some of these topics, if anybody in the working group has some comments that they want to add, some thoughts, some tips, so it is a working group, so please feel free to raise your hands, come off mute. We are hoping that this session is really engagement centric and getting some good group participation from folks. So, as always, we like to know who's in the room. We like folks who are in the room to know who's in the room. So, if you could just do a quick introduction in the chat, just type your name, your organization, and where you're calling in from. We've started to get folks from all around the country joining this call, which is really exciting and cool to see how far it's expanded. But if y'all are joining us for the first time, I am John Gane. I am the coalition co-director for Main Clean Communities and joined by my colleague here, Peggy O'Neill-Vivanco, who is the coalition director for Vermont Clean Communities. And we have been doing this working group. Actually need to update that name now. But we are doing this through the Jumpstart funding through actually the National Lab of the Rockies. Really to look at assessing current and future demand for renewable diesel, specifically in the Northeast, with a bigger focus on the northern New England states. We're looking at medium and heavy duty off-road applications, specifically in the agriculture sector, ski industry, really anything that uses diesel here. And our objective is to determine the fueling needs, capacity, any training needs that need to happen, cost effectiveness to transition to renewable diesel, and really sort of develop a pathway forward for fleets in the Northeast who have maybe never heard of renewable diesel to start putting it into their fleet mix. So just to recap some of the sessions that we've done in the past, we started with a renewable diesel introduction. We went into logistics. Last time we talked about policy considerations and some of the big policy measures that have been implemented on the West Coast and some of the other states on the East Coast that have really helped foster this new fuel market. And today we are talking about implementation. I think Peggy, when we were first scoping out this working group and sort of the focus of it, our end goal was to sort of bring the topic of renewable diesel to the Northeast in general, and then get a handful of fleets that are ready to take the next step, feel confident, are interested in a pilot program and moving through some sort of group procurement process if possible. So with that, we'll do a recap of some of the initial sessions for folks that maybe weren't on for all of them, just some of our key takeaways from each of the sessions and some of the presenters that we had. And then we'll sort of go into the pilot development process. So I'll pass it to Peggy to do the first recap.
Great. Thanks, John. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. We are really just going to hit the wave tops on this recap. kind of why we got here, how we got here, and really, really where we want to go. So as many of you know, former Mayor Adams of New York City announced that he was going to transition his fleet to renewable diesel. That really got us going, along with some of our ski industry folks who were talking about renewable diesel being used in the Intermountain West and how and when can we get it here. So that initial piece of, for New York City, 16 million gallons. And we know our precious Northern New Englanders, we are not New York City, but that it was getting closer and closer. So those conversations started for us, and we recognized a greater demand, and that this transition would actually reduce the significant CO2 yearly. Next slide. So we had conversations with Sprague and Approved Oil as we were getting going on our project. One of our intro sessions, we had Nesty, Matt Luke, the technical manager for renewable diesel, who talked about RD being truly a drop-in fuel. We've heard this with some other fuels in the past, but really RD is meeting the same ASTM standards as regular diesel. So looking at also the carbon intensity, and that's where we save on what we would look at life cycle emissions, which is really important to calculate those, not just the tailpipe piece. We're looking for ways to close the gap between, sorry, John, close the gap between the price of renewable diesel, which is a little bit higher than a regular diesel, especially in states like ours where we do not have a low carbon fuel standard. Go ahead. Our logistics piece, then we met with Massport. Shalish from Massport was like fantastic partner, where we also did a site visit in the fall. They still have their electrification goals. So for states like Vermont and Maine in particular, where we are still ZEV states, we have our climate policies and goals to meet. They're still moving towards electrification, but instead of the heavy duty sector where there either isn't an affordable vehicle, or looking at the off-road sector and the duty cycles that electrification will not work, they are looking at how renewable diesel can help them meet some of those climate goals. They're melting snow and ice on Logan Airport. So if they can do that on the runway, we can use renewable diesel up in the North Country. Next slide. Then we had Tom Bradley of Boyne Resorts. I think he's on the call right now. VP of Sustainability. He did a great presentation for us on the deployment of renewable diesel at Boyne Resorts on the West Coast. We're really looking to see how we can get this in our ski areas back east. So they were focusing on cold climate. They were piloting different blends, starting with an R30, scaling up to an R50, and then transitioning to an R100. We'll talk a little bit more about kind of that in the pilot phase of like how, when, what you want to set yourself up for success. And clearly Boyne Resorts has. They've also using it at Big Sky Resort, and I'm going to not say this right, Snoqualm Pass in Washington State. They're using Nesty, and Tom reminded us in our session 2 to make sure that you're communicating with your provider, that you are getting what you expect, especially for cold climate areas. Next slide.
And we actually got an email from Tom right before this working group that sounds like a fourth mountain that's using renewable diesel as well. So it's still expanding.
Great, thanks, John. Then in our last session on policy, we had like heavy hitters from Vermont here. Alex DePillis from Agency of Agriculture, and he spoke about the crop potential for seed oils. So could Vermont actually be a producer, and how does that look? And certainly the agricultural sector is an emitter of diesel emissions, and they can also be part of the solution. So looking again, not just at heavy duty on-road vehicles, our snowcats, and also our ag sector. Excuse me, we had Matt Coda from Meadow Hill Consulting, who spoke about really some of the challenges for the fuel industry to sell lower carbon fuel products. There's a miss thing in there, sorry about that. Um, because they're different incentive structures. We're small states. We really need a regional approach, like a regional low carbon fuel standard. And we need programs to compel buyers to purchase lower carbon products with a low carbon fuel standard. Next. Um, in addition, on that policy piece, we had Joe Natale from Renstar, who spoke about the renewable diesel pilot with MBTA commuter rail. And he helped us break down the understanding and language to put out an RFP for fuel. Joe also talked about Renstar having these mobile fueling systems on rail cars. So again, really looking at the whole system for integrating renewable diesel into delivery as well. Ken Jones, also from Vermont, he's a retired economic analyst. He worked on the clean heat standard here in Vermont and mentioned that we really need to bring the thermal sector in for demand. We have still home heating oil in our state. Also need to combat some of the negative messaging around seed oil in renewable diesel, and look at the carbon intensity values. There's a lot of research coming out of California. We have learned a lot, and really look at developing a whole market for renewable diesel and making sure that we are communicating clearly carbon intensity and what those emissions mean and how they can help us move towards our climate goals. And then John, I think you can take it from here.
Yeah, so this is a screenshot that I grabbed from the Alternative Fuels Data Center on the US Department of Energy. They've got this really great tool that displays all of these publicly accessible alternative fueling stations. I think this is no secret to this group and anybody that's been having renewable diesel conversations. It's still West Coast dominated. There's policy in the West Coast that is really incentivizing fuel production and inserting it into their fuel markets. However, you're starting to see more and more pop up, sort of in the Intermountain West a little bit, and then over on the East Coast. What you'll see is not as many fueling stations, but we started to document known pilot programs. So pilot programs that have already happened, pilot programs that have either wrapped up, pilot programs that have stopped. But at some point, there was a pilot program there. Some of them are from the SUNY college system, Yale University, New York City Fleet, Massport Authority, MBTA commuter rail. So it's, less populated than the West Coast, but it's really exciting to see these pilots popping up. We've been trying our best to connect with everybody that has run a pilot program in New England and the northern states, trying to keep connected with everybody, translate sort of the best practices and lessons learned that have happened through that pilot program and involve them through this group. So that list is continuing to grow, which is exciting to see. And hopefully we'll get some more dots in Vermont, definitely some in Maine, and hopefully some in New Hampshire as well. So really wanted to highlight some of these pilot programs because I think it's some stuff has happened since we last met in our previous session. And one of the big things that we wanted to highlight was this update from Massachusetts Port Authority. So they have transitioned from running their pilot program through fall. And now we are looking at, or Massachusetts Port Authority has announced that they have signed a contract with Brocco Energy for a 12-month renewable diesel procurement. And so they're going to be using 1.2 million gallons, and that's going to be used in a variety of vehicles across their fleets, looking at the airport shuttle buses, looking at maintenance vehicles, grounds equipment, luggage carriers, generators, sports systems, fire trucks, really everything. They had a lot of success running their pilot program, felt very confident with the partners that they had engaged and the conversations that they had had, and they're all in. So I think this is the first big all-in fleet that we know of in New England that is, deploying it at this scale of over 1 million gallons, which is really exciting. Um, the next one that we wanted to talk about was really highlighting this RenStar pilot program with MBTA. This is another big program that's happening in the Northeast. Um, the MBTA commuter rail in northern Massachusetts is currently using renewable diesel in a pilot, one of the first in the country on rail. And this is a collaboration between Keolis, MBTA, and RenStar, using about 500,000 gallons of renewable diesel and using it sort of in their or looking at opportunities for using floating storage, like Peggy had mentioned. So I think Joe had made a joke that it's not floating storage in the sense that it's floating in water, but basically mobile rail carts that have storage that could be easily transported on our existing infrastructure networks. So, this is a real opportunity and I think a model that hopefully other fleets can look at utilizing or a unique transportation, storage, and sourcing opportunity for how to use our existing infrastructure. We've talked about some of the high costs for getting the fuel, transporting the fuel, the logistics. A lot of it has to do in the transportation. And so there are sort of these different approaches that folks have sort of gotten innovative with to help bring that cost down and find alternative solutions. So longer term, this pilot project is sort of on a scaled approach, but looking at evaluating full transition opportunities, which would be a big win for rail. The other one that we want to highlight is this conversation and pilot program that we've been having with SUNY. So we haven't been directly involved in the execution of the pilot, but Peggy has been having some conversations with some partners over at the university system. And they have been using renewable diesel for medium and heavy duty vehicles running in buses, heavy duty utility vehicles, mowers. They're getting their supply from Sprague Energy and out of the Rensselaer area. Again, with the goals of lower emissions, moving away from fossil fuels. I think a lot of folks have been approaching this work through aggressive decarbonization through electrification. And right now, that's posing a significant challenge in the heavy duty sector, just with cost and availability and ongoing maintenance. And so, this renewable diesel alternative has been really popular in the heavy duty sector specifically as that drop-in alternative that doesn't require significant infrastructure upgrades, specialized vehicles, and some of the other considerations that other alternative fuels have had. So I think that's the last sort of pilot that we wanted to highlight, but really sort of showcasing that these are popping up all over New England right now. And we're hoping to get some of those pilot programs or explore pilot programs in some of the other New England states and really look at what that group procurement and deployment process could look like as hopefully a continuation of this group process. But with that, I'll pass it back to Peggy to talk more about some of the considerations and best practices that we've sort of culminated from conversations that we've had with stakeholders doing this work.
Great. Thanks, John. So we really, really, really want pilots in our states, and so we just want to just be clear because we want successful pilots. So this is a brief outline, and I know folks who've done more comprehensive pilots. I'm thinking of you, Tom Bradley, probably have more to add to this. This is really just a skeleton. First, you want to identify the purpose of the pilot. So for different fleets, it's going to be, you really want to identify what this pilot is going to enable you to, what decisions it's going to enable to make. So, what vehicle compatibility, what are the operational impacts? Are you looking to reduce emissions? Or you want to test procurement and logistics, et cetera? So be clear in your goal so that everything underneath it kind of goes back up to that goal. Um, plan the evaluation before the pilot starts. John and I work with small fleets and municipalities as well. And I can't underscore this enough. You have to start measuring your stuff now, um, because then you have something to compare it to. So you're going to need both your quantitative and your qualitative. Social scientists, I love the qualitative stuff, but you really need both in this. So looking at your vehicles, your fuel economy, cold starts, how things work on your vehicles right now with the fuel that you're using, your driver performance comments, and in that qualitative piece, especially with our drivers and our maintenance techs, they're our partners in this, and we need to take everything they say and kind of situate that. We all have, like what's a real complaint and what's just like, oh, I don't like this change, and make sure that you're tracking that. Any unplanned downtime, maintenance, which we'll get into a little bit later, because you need that pre-pilot baseline of the same vehicles so that you're really able to evaluate. And you want to choose the right vehicles. We heard from Massport that they used, basically the sloppy jalopy because they didn't really care about it, and it wound up performing better than it had in like years. It might have been like a vehicle from the 70s, but if you have a large enough fleet, thinking about 10 to 20% of um, like excuse me, like a homogeneous subfleet. Again, you want to be able to do true comparisons, apples to apples. Next slide. And then the fueling piece. So you, as we heard in our logistics presentation, you want to confirm the specs. So renewable diesel does meet the ASTM, and you also want to make sure that if you're looking for, a cold weather package, that you have that with the cloud point, the pour point, any additives. And then if you are evaluating kind of the emissions, what is the feedstock and what is the carbon intensity score? These are a lot of details, but these are the details that are going to help kind of evaluate the efficacy of this fuel if you're looking for that in your pilot. Procurement, understanding what the procurement can look like. We're going to go into that a little bit later with a little presentation from Connor Smith. And fuel storage. Is it going to be, delivered to you? Do you have a dedicated tank, or are you looking for, a third party kind of fuel system? Excuse me. Next slide. This is just a list of some of the folks, some of the stakeholders that we have had who kind of been part of successful pilots. We have some of the folks on the call from Global, from Sprague, and as we said again, Neste, Bracco Energy, and I think we will also have some of our local fuel providers in each of our states who could join the discussion on helping to procure the fuel. Next slide. The next step in the pilot is running it, the launch. And as I mentioned, training your drivers and mechanics, letting them know what renewable diesel is, especially folks in the Northeast who've had experience with biodiesel and gelling. It is not biodiesel. So making sure that they really understand that it's a different fuel and that they don't need to change their driving, but you want that clear communication between you and your staff. You very likely will see some kind of filter differences. We haven't been able to kind of quantify this yet, but that there are fewer filter changes as a result because the renewable diesel is cleaner burning. And then looking is like kind of what's a normal issue versus what's a real problem because of the fuel. Evaluation. Ideally, you want a 3 to 6 month pilot. If you could do longer, great. Full season is awesome. I think anyone up in our neck of the woods, you really want to cover winter. You really want to see how this performs in the cold. And we've had some wicked cold days here. Like, oh my God, it's been brutal. So understanding when you do your procurement, really what the negative temperatures your fuel will handle, and when you need to have some additives. Evaluation, and again, the vehicle operation, the maintenance impacts, emission benefits, procurement, and is this scalable? What would it look like for your fleet to move to full fleet conversion?
Um, so I actually want to just, oops, go back one more slide. So the reason we really wanted to bring up this stakeholder slide and include this slide, this is actually a slide that's pulled from Massachusetts Port Authority from their presentation that they gave. But this is sort of all of the list of partners that they had to engage with and work with to run their pilot program initially. So they worked with their fuel suppliers and distributors, like Peggy mentioned, Global and Brocco Energy, having lots of discussions, talking about procurement options, supply, having steady supply, having availability, talking through pricing, logistics. One of their concerns was getting steady supply through the dead of winter. If we're having a blizzard in New England, which we're not shy to. And then, making sure that they're working and engaging with their OEMs that they have vehicles with. So because renewable diesel was a new fuel for them, really making sure that this wasn't going to avoid warranty. They had shared this really cool story that they were working on this snow melter and wanted to know if renewable diesel would still work in the dead of winter, melting snow under sort of duress. And so, they actually had one of their partners drive up with the fuel to Nova Scotia, much colder than us, to test the fuel, and that it worked out great, and that really instilled a lot of confidence for folks. And so, doing the due diligence and making sure that you're checking all your boxes, you're engaging the right folks, bringing them to the table, having these conversations. These are all the big partners that you need to be thinking about or should be thinking about as you're scoping out a pilot program and looking at implementation. It takes or it can take a village to get from A to B. So yeah, that's sort of what we wanted to iterate. And if folks, we can take some time here if folks want to share any updates for known pilot programs that have been happening in your neck of the woods. And then we'll sort of move from there into more of a facilitated discussion on next steps for the working group. But wanted to at least give space for folks to share any updates that they might have. Peggy and I are having conversations with everybody all the time, but it's impossible to keep track of everything that's going on. So would love to hear from the group if there are any some big updates that have come up. Okay, it's all right. If anybody has any updates that they want to share, feel free to drop them in the chat or raise your hand, come off mute. But other than that, we're gonna move to the more engagement-centric part of our working group session. So this is really to sort of recap the working group that we've been having over the last 4 quarters. Start talking about where to go from here. I think Peggy and I started this idea of just introducing renewable diesel to all of our New England stakeholders, especially in light of electrification being a greater hurdle than it previously was. Really trying to start a conversation around what comes next. So this program and these working group sessions and all the meetings and conversations and such that we've been having over the last few months have been really supported by the National Lab the Rockies, and we're very grateful for them for funding this work. But as that project sort of wraps up and comes to a close, we want to be very intentional about where we go from here, keeping this group sort of engaged, keeping folks connected. And we really want to know what would be most useful for you. So, I know in the past we've really done a lot of presenting at folks, having guests come and join, which has been really informative and great. And now it's time to turn to you all. So we're going to be joined today by our wonderful colleague from New Hampshire, from Granite State Clean Cities, who is the acting director for that coalition right now. Currently serves at the Bureau of New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. Some of you may know her, Jessica Wilcox. So we are asking folks to please turn on your cameras if you can, but remain muted unless you're speaking. Feel free if you have something to contribute, want to bring a topic to this conversation. We can sort of veer off the path if we need to a little bit, but really want to get some group participation from you all. If there are any questions that are outstanding from some of the previous sessions that we've had, we'd love to take those questions. Hopefully, someone in the group can address them, or
I
we'll
see.
find someone that can.
I see Barry's.
Do. I've electronically raised my hand. Um, is there ever a situation where renewable diesel performs better than fossil-based diesel fuel?
Oh, Stephen Dodge, before I can even unmute myself. Stephen, do you want to answer that?
No, I think Leo, I don't want to put Leo on the spot. I was actually raising my hand to say something else, not response to that. But I think the answer is yes. And if Leo's on, he could probably explain that. Sorry to throw you under the bus, Leo.
No, that's fine. We've been working with a lot of fleets during some of the pilot projects that have been mentioned earlier. We're fuel quality advisors, and we've been working with fuel dealers on bioheat, introducing biodiesel into the thermal sector. To answer your question about, better, Barry, it depends on what metric you're looking for. So if you say, hey, is it better emissions, right? I think we've talked that it can provide greenhouse gas emission improvement, upwards of 70, 80% better than fossil fuel diesel. Um, but in general, it acts and behaves just like, mineral diesel because it has to meet the same specifications. Um, so, and it really, a lot of the performance is really based on, in the pilot project section, people talked about how to prepare for pilot projects. One of the things that we should add, I believe, is tank storage pre and post. So you may have a fuel tank or a bulk tank that's in storage that may be 10, 20 years old, and it may have accumulation of things like water and sediment in them. So before beginning the pilot project, you'd want to make sure that the health of the storage tank that's going to store the fuel
Sure.
is measured before, because it could throw off successful results with some, you know, unintended data, but it could be coming because of the storage tank before the pilots started, wasn't in the best of condition. But hopefully that answers your question.
Yes. Thank you very much, Leo.
Thanks, Leo. Stephen?
Thanks, Peggy. It's great to be part of this group, and I hope it continues. I know that's a subject we're going to talk about later, but I just want to add an observation. We just came, I guess it's now almost 2 weeks ago, from our annual Clean Fuels Alliance conference in Orlando, Florida. Not a bad place to be this time of year. And it's been the question is always on people's minds is, we know it works, we know it's compatible, we know it's ASTM certified, is what it's going to cost and can I get it? And those have been issues this past year. I can't kill the lily. I mean, that's been a real issue. But my big takeaway from that conference is, and it was just kind of verified yesterday when the IRS came out with their final proposed 45Z regulations. The bottom line is this, is that 2024 was a banner year for our industry, not so much in 2025 because of some of the federal policies and some of the uncertainty in Washington. That ship is righting itself even as we speak. We know this administration has not been kind to renewables. The one renewable that they have been kind to because of energy security issues and the benefit to farmers is biomass-based diesel. That's RD and BD and sustainable aviation fleet fuel. So two things are happening. The IRS has proposed regulations that clarify the production credit, and that is going to create tremendous certainty where there wasn't any at all last year, and that's going to affect prices as production goes up. And they're soon to announce the RVO volumes, which were the proposal was very robust for the renewable fuel standard. And that's probably going to come in the next couple of months. So those two things have created a tremendous amount of certainty on the federal level, which helps production, which increases supplies and reduces price. Just want to make that as an observation.
Stephen, that is really exciting news, which we could all use these days. So thanks for that update. Um, I want to pivot to Connor Smith from Green Mountain Transit. Again, John and I have spoken to anybody who would pick up the phone and listen to our questions. And we were talking to Connor about this idea of group procurement. Again, we're in states with smaller fleets, and as we've heard, we really need the demand before we get the supply. And we had some great conversations with Connor. So, Connor, can you talk us through a little bit about some of your kind of great ideas and notions about RFQ, RFI, MOU, and all the other alphabets that we talked through a couple weeks ago?
Yeah, thanks for that introduction. Hello, everybody. I'm Connor Smith. I work at Green Mountain Transit here in Burlington, Vermont. I'm the capital projects manager here, so I dabble in everything from procurement to actual implementation of mostly construction projects. But the last 2 years, I've been involved in our fuel procurement. We have a 50-ish bus fleet of heavy-duty transit vehicles based here in Burlington. We have a 12,000 gallon above ground diesel tank currently. Every year we go out to bid for a fixed price fueling contract for ULSD. This last year, through our conversations with Peggy and this working group, we were very curious about renewable diesel. And as part of our annual contract, we put out an option for renewable diesel. As expected, and as many of you have run into or have heard, the prices that came back were about 60 cents to $1 more than ULSD. We went with ULSD, but we were prepared to go with renewable diesel if it was cost comparable. So, the question in our minds and in many of your minds, and I know Peggy has talked about this, is, how do we get the supply and how do we make it economically feasible? Um, as I've mentioned, my background here at GMT is in procurement, so that's kind of where I'm coming at it from, what the shape of an agreement could be. And where my mind went towards was some form of a joint procurement. In talking with Peggy, it sounds like there's a lot of interest up here in Vermont. I mean, I'm speaking specifically to Vermont organizations here, but a lot of different organizations with a lot of different flavors, both public and private. And what got me thinking was something in the form of a joint procurement. I don't know the group's familiarity with that type of model, but there are agencies or organizations out there such as Sourcewell or NASPO. These are big organizations that do joint procurements mostly for public esque agencies to be able to allow other public agencies or participating agencies or states to purchase off of cooperative agreements. The clear benefit is price competition. You end up getting better prices and usually a more streamlined purchasing process for the public agency. So I guess I was kind of thinking in the vein of how could we do that on a smaller scale here in Vermont. Um, what kind of a joint procurement process would we have to go through? What kind of agencies and organizations here in Vermont would be amenable to that? Some of the benefits that I would see would be obviously economies of scale. Um, and also, through a joint procurement, my kind of expectation of this would be potentially, an organization like GMT, um, sort of maybe acting as the chief procurement agency on something like that that puts out the overarching contract that outlines the broad specifications, that outlines the contracting terms, the broad terms, essentially, guarantees a public contracting process. And then each sub-organization that's a part of that procurement would execute their own participating agreement with whatever vendor is awarded the contract. That's similar to how NASPO or Sourcewell kind of handles it from my experience. I guess, the other big part of this is probably this is going to be, different than what certainly GMT has done in the past if we were to go this route where it would probably need to be a long-term contract with a vendor. More than a year fueling contract, which, like I said, is different than what we've done, especially for a volatile product like fuel. So it would take some thinking about how you price that and how you build into the contract scalability over multiple years. But the reason that I say that is because, we don't have the supply up here. It's a new product for the Northeast. And vendors are rightfully a little leery about entering into a market that is unstable. So how do we assure vendors that we're in it for the long run? How do we sort of, um, put a number to what our demand is up here? And then achieve some of those economies of scale, hopefully, because I know that, we're not all able to pay a premium for renewable diesel. So that's kind of the overarching broad strokes. I know, Peggy and I had talked about, and Jonathan and I had all talked about, the idea of an MOU, how do we band together these agencies? I don't know if it needs to be an MOU, but, we kind of threw out that idea, really just trying to put some structure behind the interest that's up here and really having a concerted conversation, and then using that working group or that more focused group to move towards a joint procurement, maybe a two-step RFP, request for proposals, kind of process to identify a vendor that's ready to be in a partnership, more than just a trucking agency that's going to haul fuel up to us. We need something more robust that's going to allow us to work with this vendor for the long haul, allow us to maybe utilize some pilot projects, that sort of thing. So that was a lot. That's broad strokes. My brain's kind of all over the place with this. Peggy, I don't know if there's any fill in the blanks that you want to do there, but that's kind of where my brain's at.
Oh, Connor, thank you. Thank you so much. I have a feeling any fill in the blanks might come from folks here on the call. So again, Connor, thank you so much. If you can be around for any questions. And then Jessica Wilcox, you want to take it from here?
Great. Thank you so much, Peggy and John. It's exciting to be here with this group. So let's get some discussion going. I think John and Peggy had sent out a bunch of questions that we wanted folks to kind of chew on and come to this call prepared to dig into. Before we do that, I do see a hand raised. Alex, if you wanted to unmute and share your thoughts.
Maybe after you. I mean, I was going to make a couple suggestions for Connor and then a question, but maybe
No, I
it's
think,
just, well, so here's maybe for you as well.
yeah.
So Connor, I mean, when I've seen these kind of procurements of renewable versus fossil, one way to do it is to establish a floor and a ceiling. You got a floor that protects, and your price is always in between the floor of some low number for diesel, $1.50 a gallon, that protects your seller, and a ceiling, that's right, $4 a gallon, that protects you. right? You're never going to have to pay $4 a gallon for your renewable diesel. Somewhere it floats in there. So you still have the float and you get a long term. But that's one suggestion. The other suggestion is to get them to tell you, look, if you give us, get the procurement could be not for just the initial draft procurement or inquiry could be, what's it going to cost us for 500,000? What's it going to cost us for 5 million? Like, you're saying we need the demand, but if you ask for 50,000, you're going to get a way too high number. So, find out just like price and availability at different quantities. That's one suggestion. The other suggestion, rather. But my question for you is, you said, oh, it was 60 cents more a gallon or something like that. I don't even know what that means. Like, I don't even know what diesel costs in your situation for transportation. But I guess the question becomes for you and these others, how much more are you willing to pay? Because you could tell the procurement people right off the bat, look, my people are willing to pay 20 cents more, or they're flat even. They're not going to pay a damn cent more. That's a good number for your potential procurement person or your seller, whoever it is, to know. Like, where are you willing to go on price? Do you know that? If it's got to be flat even, that's a good point.
Yeah, I do like your first point about the bracketing. It's something that I had kind of run into in my research a little bit about that idea of a floor and then a ceiling price, especially if we potentially considered a joint procurement for more than just renewable diesel, if this was actually like a cooperative purchase for diesel and renewable diesel, because I think there's probably some agencies out there that might be willing to have a both. So like if a renewable diesel was going to be more expensive on this contract, agencies could elect to, this month I'm going to buy standard diesel because it's cheaper, or maybe do a mixture. If an agency wants to run an R20 blend or something like that. Shooting totally from the hip here, but yeah, that is of interest for sure.
Connor, this is Jonah Tolley with Runstar. I just wanted to highlight something there. Um, when you talk about a mixed RFP, i.e., ULSD and RD, that is 100% correct because right now in the Northeast, we mentioned a program that was contracted with Massport. That number is a blended number of both ULSD and RD. And as Leo can attest, there is no additive that you can throw in RD for anti-gelling. So a lot of them are going to ULSD right now in that region and a premium diesel that does have the additive that can help with that. In addition, when you're procuring it, I would look at doing a line item of exactly what the costs are, what the transportation is, and what the differential is, because I don't know of too many groups that would give you back any credits on a fixed number, if it's a high level number. And then lastly, when you're procuring, I see Jonathan and John, JW and John from Global on here. We all sit, the three of us sit on a committee in Massachusetts that's looking at a regionalized New England SAF solution. And recently there was an announcement on a draft for a tax credit for SAF. We got to remember something. The groups that produce SAF are the same groups that produce RD. And if we can get them to price RD accordingly based off of a SAF contract, you utilize that to your advantage. And I do think that there is going to be advantages on the horizon for that.
Could you explain SAF? I've not run into that term
It's
before.
a sustainable aviation fuel.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's produced by the same groups that produce RD. They also produce, they have the capability to produce SAF as well. So they're going to go after SAF supply and the significant credits that are on the horizon. And like I said, the governor has announced something in Massachusetts as a platform that's coming out. Well, you take advantage of that and say, get an offset. Okay, if you're going to supply us SAF, what can you do for us on the RD side?
Hmm.
This is great discussion, and I think this is exactly where Peggy and John were hoping that this fourth session would go. I know when I sat down with them, they said our ultimate goal would be to see ultimately a successful pilot, as Peggy kind of emphasized that word earlier, and pathways forward for both the private sector and the public sector. So come on, folks, turn off your cameras. Let's discuss a little bit more. I want to draw attention to a comment I saw in the chat from Lou. Let's get the Vermont, Burlington-based folks together to pursue this concept, to pursue a pilot. Are other states here in New England and the Northeast interested in joining that momentum? Let's start with maybe who's interested and who's kind of thinking along those lines of pilot or joint procurement. Anybody want to raise hands? I know, Connor, you've discussed kind of this concept of leading the charge in developing a procurement. Is that something you're raising your hand to? Or what more are you looking for from folks to kind of take that leap?
Yeah, I'm curious. I mean, just in Vermont, like what other groups are we kind of in the same room with? And what stage of the game are they at? And that's kind of where like we keep saying MOU, memorandum of understanding, but I guess what I mean there is getting a consolidated group of people together and sort of hammering out some of those details about, what is our current fleet demands, what would be, fuel needs, winter mixes, temperature on a pilot program versus no, we're ready to, this is a drop-in fuel, I'm ready to buy it next year kind of thing. Um, and then having that group be, the group that collects those questions about like, okay, well, how would we price this? And if the procurement took this shape, if we were just talking about, um, the floor price versus the ceiling price and how much of a premium are people willing to pay, like putting all of that into a request for information and then submitting that to all of the potential vendors so that we're sort of setting ourselves up for success in that procurement process, and we're making sure that we're putting something out on the street if we got to that step that vendors are able to actually work with, and kind of tailoring our request to what's actually possible. That would be, my goal, if we were to do that up here in Vermont. And I think GMT is interested. I'm just one person here, but our fleet manager and others here are definitely interested to move forward to some extent.
And would you see this being something that could extend beyond Vermont into, let's say, neighboring New England states, or is it something that, based on your procurement understanding, would have to be tailored specifically for one state?
That's a great question. I don't know if the fuel providers here know better than I do about regulatory stuff that way. I'm not sure, to be honest. It would be very optimistic to expand it beyond Vermont. It'd be cool, but yeah, I don't know what would go into that.
Sophia, I see a hand raised there. Is that response to this discussion or?
Somewhat, but not that specific question. More
Oh,
just
okay.
to add, so I'll wait and see if any of the providers have comments.
Fair
Hey,
enough.
Jessica, it's Stephen Levy. Good afternoon, everyone. So historically, going back to any new product coming into the market, it's build it and they will come has always failed. So the key is to have the ground floor anchor user. So when we commercialized ultra-low sulfur diesel fuel 25 years ago, and it was New York City Transit Authority, which was able to then grow into even coming up to the T and Connecticut Transit and RIPTA and far south too. In this particular case, a little different. And, as you could see, really in New York, the ground floor anchor tenants was the Port Authority of New York, the City of New York, fleets such as Sprague, and having that ongoing storage and that we do in New York City and up in Rensselaer. But the key for bringing it and having it local for fleets to use every day on a daily basis, yes, it has to be stored every day, and you have to be able to be confident in consistency of supply and the product quality for both summer and winter. So for a pilot project, it's not going to be the same price. It's going to be even more than what you would normally use the RD for. And it is available to have a pilot project. But the key, in order to have it readily available, are commitments by fleets and to have it on like the state Massachusetts procurement or something large like the T, which really isn't, could be large if it was on the state. But the people that are say they're going to buy it on any of the state contracts, they have to commit to buy it. Because what will happen is the supplier is going to have an agreement with a processor, and they're committed to bring up that product, store it, and to use it certain volumes over periods of time. And that's really the key. For the pilots, you work with your suppliers, and like people work with us, and we can get you the product to test it. But the key to have it here, and hopefully from Steve Dodge's mouth to everybody's ears down in DC, where we're able to get those RVOs and understand what the production credits are going to be to bring the prices down.
Stephen, when you think about anchor fleet, is this like a very state-specific kind of focus that you're thinking on, or do you think that it could be regional beyond just one state?
The more volume, the better. But the key is you need something to start with that makes sense to bring up product here and store it and take up tank storage. Because remember, a supplier that owns terminals such as us, there's tanks that are there. You just don't want to bring in product and have it sit. It's like a service station. You need to keep moving product. So it's the same thing. You need the ongoing ratable volume, or at least volume over a certain period of time that a user is going to commit to.
Thank you. Great background. Now I want to return to, was it Sophia? You had a question raised.
Yeah, not a question, just a kind of a comment on some of what we're doing in Massachusetts besides what you all already heard about. So I work with the Mass State Energy Office, and our team specifically works with other state agencies, entities, authorities, higher ed. So we've met with Massport and MBTA as well to talk to them about what they're doing with renewable diesel. But our team is actually finalizing and hope to have soon published just a renewable diesel policy guidance for the use of renewable diesel in state operations to make sure that both the use cases that entities are using renewable diesel for, as well as the feedstocks and the sourcing, are aligning with how we are doing our emissions accounting, especially, and making sure that when we're giving emissions reduction credit, that it is meeting the requirements that we have set. Obviously, an entity can go and use renewable diesel that does not meet the requirements that are set in this policy. We do the state emissions accounting for the state portfolio, and so they won't receive any reduction credit if they use things outside of those requirements. Excuse me. We also are planning to talk more thoroughly with our state procurement office. So it's our operational services division is our state procurement office about how to get it on state contract and make it easier to procure. That's just kind of where we're at.
That sounds like a great resource, and I see Peggy wants to know if you're willing to share that. So
yeah, I'm definitely happy to share it. I think we've almost finalized it, so I'm happy to send it around once we get the final sign off.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. Any questions for Sophia, folks? All right. Appreciate your update there. So that kind of brings up an interesting topic of the state contract, and I think that's perhaps a whole other piece to as we're talking about the pilot, developing cooperative purchasing, an RFP, the MOU, the state contract. There's a lot of different, I guess, directions people could go in. I do see that there are ski resorts on Boyne. I know you're using this fuel. Loon, I see that you've joined. we've got transit fleets, we've got waste fleets. Think about what prompted you to kind of start this discussion and wanting to be here, and would love to hear from you all. Do you have any burning questions? Do you have more that you want to see from this discussion?
Just a quick note before
Yes.
everybody answers that question. We have a request from Connor from Jonathan Hackett to repeat the regulatory question. You can do that in the chat if you can. Or
Sorry, what was the regulatory question?
Jonathan, would you like to specify?
Yeah, maybe I maybe I misheard, but I thought you posed a regulatory question to fuel suppliers such as ourselves.
Oh, I think that was just Jessica mentioned, expanding this idea of a joint procurement beyond Vermont's borders and the potential for that. And I just wasn't sure if there were any regulatory requirements for that or what. My procurement experience is purely limited to federal and kind of Vermont specific, I guess. But I don't know if there's any cross-border issues to consider, but
Not from our perspective. I suspect that might be limited by state law, but I don't, not from my end.
yeah.
And for Alex, I can get back to you on the peaking power gallons question. I just want to make sure I'm doing my math correctly.
Yeah, that was a math quiz, Jonathan. Just thought I'd put it out there for people. All those big zeros after the numbers.
Great. Thanks for the clarifications there. So, folks, what are your burning questions? What do you feel like you don't have at this point in order to kind of take the leap to move forward? As Peggy and John said, we're here to try to get folks to come together and really unite in taking that big step forward towards a pilot, towards coalescing on a joint procurement. Is there anything more that you need?
Yeah, so
Let
I
me
just
hop
would
in.
say, yeah, Lou, go ahead. And if
Lou
you're like
has
my
his hand up.
9-year-old, you would just blurt it out. So let's hear some blurting, please. I'm
Well,
used to it.
well, there's a lot of discussion here about the legal and financial details. And I see a lot of people on here from Vermont that I didn't expect to see. And I certainly think that the key number that anybody really is going to care about is how much demand is there really here. I don't have the slightest idea how much fuel Green Mountain Power, or pardon me, Green Mountain Transit uses. I have some idea how much the city of South Burlington uses, how much UVM uses, et cetera, snow. We need to put all of that together and see whether it's 500,000, 500 million, wherever the heck it is, and start working from there. That's why I think we ought to get together with a whole lot of people and at least get a survey out to get a rough idea where we stand.
And that brings up a great point, Lou. Is it identifying the amount of potential fuel usage that really is the first step? Identifying all of the folks that are interested in joining that cooperative agreement, looking at how much volume of fuel this group makes up, and is there a minimum volume that is needed to really entice a supplier to respond to such a request?
Well, to earlier discussions, bigger the volume, the better the price.
Right.
And um, the more volume there is, city of South Burlington doesn't burn that much compared to what you folks are talking about. But so why should we be interested? I'm only interested because I think Peggy is in a position to pull a bunch of people together. So now instead of talking about the city of South Burlington, we're talking about Chittenden County, or we're talking the state of Vermont, you know, and and until you see that critic, it's like
starting a fire to keep warm, and until you get the critical mass going, you aren't doing anything. Everybody's just sitting around staying there cold. So uh, that's uh, and I talking to a supplier, I wouldn't think a supplier would pay any attention to you until you had some kind of a number that was big enough to get them interested.
So what is that number? Is it 1 million?
I think if you look at EIA.gov, the Energy Information Agency, the Vermont total demand for diesel in the state of on-road is about 60 to 70 million gallons a year. So maybe the goal should be about 10, say, hey, maybe as a working group, can we get to 10% of our
That's the number
volume?
I was thinking about.
But just how big is the universe for Jonathan or Stephen or others or Joe to want to play? You've got to say, hey, this is our universe. And then, we're going to do a pilot project and shoot for X, but I don't buy or sell fuel. So, but I do try to look at what demand is, um, just to have an understanding of, what's at play.
That gives us a great number to start with, and I like your 10% idea.
I would point us instead to like, where's the break point? Because if cost is a real consideration, is the break point 500,000? Is it 1 million? Like, where do you start to get the decrease in cost when you're asking somebody to provide the fuel? And often it's a doubling. Like for 50,000, it's this, and there can be a fairly good rule of thumb for percentage decrease by volume increase.
There's another breakpoint to consider. I'm glad you brought the subject up, and that is uh, if I bring it up here in the city, uh, somebody's going to ask me how much more or if I go to a group meeting, they're going to ask me, well, how much more is the city willing to pay to get this? And right now, I don't have that answer, but we need that answer from everybody that's involved.
And that brings up a good point too, Lee. I'm sorry, Lou. Is cost neutrality a goal, or is basically the learning and the experience kind of worth paying a premium on this?
Big table and a lot of coffee, and let's work the issue.
So there's been discussion about bringing together folks in Vermont for a pilot. And this is not to exclude other states. Maine, New Hampshire, New York, Massachusetts, obviously there's efforts going on around the region. But if a pilot is going to move forward and everybody's saying Peggy should pull these folks together, the reality is that I think the funding to continue supporting the group or supporting a breakout of this group is really not there. So to basically bridge those gaps, is there someone that would be willing to step up or be confident in taking a position to move forward and kind of lead this group discussion? Are there folks on this call that kind of see that as a role for themselves or feel they have capacity? Planting that seed for you all.
I think we should nominate someone who's not here. Who would that be? I mean,
Well,
Peggy, who comes to mind? Maybe we can seriously tap somebody like Energy Action Network or somebody that's in that position somewhat officially to probe these options. So we can put our heads together on that. I can help. I don't want to do it. It's not really my thing. I'm in ag, not transportation, not energy as much as I am in ag. So yeah, I would be able to help, but we should really think pretty clearly about who might be able to facilitate that.
Yeah, I think it's like the two prongs where we need to kind of convene the folks together. And Leo, I like the idea of, kind of this 10% of the total fuel volume, and then also Alex, like the cost break point. So we need that piece, but we also need, maybe it's Matt Coda, maybe it's like the folks who understand the fueling piece. If we go to, I think there might be some staties here. I don't want to hit like no right away. I want to like, let's move this forward so we can present to the state and policy folks like this is what we have, help us move this forward. So I don't know, maybe Alex, you and I can kind of bat around some names. I have a couple, but I want folks who are kind of willing to move forward and not move forward. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, and also I think I guess like a sub question of that is, is there a value in continuing to convene sort of like New England states together to this broader discussion? Yeah, I think ultimately to really make or to really move the needle on something like this, there does need to be those state-specific conversations, localized groups that are sort of like on the ground and doing the work that needs to get done to bring the fuel to the state. But we're also curious on the back end, like if continuing in some capacity to convene this group to share thoughts, continuing to have stakeholders share updates in whatever capacity that is. If there's an interest for that state to state collaborative process, we're interested in hearing if there's demand for that too.
Well,
Although,
let me
like,
go ahead and put it on the table because you're finally getting to where I thought this day was going to go. And that is my envision of what would happen is this thing has been a regional thing to date. It's cost so much to run it. If Vermont wanted to do one, how much money is it to take the same kinds of discussions that we've had on the regional basis and bring it down into the state level? What's that cost a year to do? And I think what you're asking is where do you get that money? Am I right?
it's definitely on our radar.
Oh, no, you know, I don't know whether it's 20,000 a year or 200,000 a year or 2 million a year, kind of thing.
Yeah, right. And that could be a wide range depending on what capacity folks would find the most useful, and staying involved at either, I think ultimately we're trying to narrow this down into these state-specific conversations, but if there is this value in keeping this broader regional group together, continuing to convene, we don't want to sort of lose sight of that too, if that helps. Go ahead, Leah.
Sure. I just wanted to comment before I forget the opportunity to do so about Lou's comment about making a pot of coffee and having conversations with other stakeholders and peers in his group. When asked about the price comparison to fossil fuel and is this going to cost more and how much, I would encourage everybody to not look at it as a cost comparison against fossil fuel. I would view it as what is the cost comparison about replacing every power unit with battery electric, or replacing every power unit with hydrogen, or replacing every power unit with ammonia, or whatever other alternative fuel you're looking at. I think what you're talking about is the cheapest greenhouse gas reduction tool because it allows you to keep your current infrastructure. So if I know I'm preaching to the choir in this group per se, but when somebody asks about what is the cost, and again, I don't sell this liquid, but when somebody says, what is the cost comparison? I would say the comparison is this versus a $500,000 new combine or a $400,000 new, locomotive or whatever that is, because that's your comparison. It's not against fossil fuel, Lou. So as you're talking to folks internally or within your stakeholder group, you shouldn't be comparing this fuel versus diesel fuel because they're not the same. You're comparing it against an alternative that's going to require infrastructure.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's I think a really helpful framing thing to think through. It's definitely some of the conversations that we've been having in Maine, especially, both Maine and Vermont are ZEV heavy states. We've got pretty aggressive electrification goals. And so, folks are moving towards taking action. The way that we take action can maybe look different or shift. And I think helping folks conceptualize that, yes, it's not comparing renewable diesel to petroleum diesel, it is comparing alternative fuels to alternative fuels. Yeah, go ahead, Mac.
It is great to hear that people are interested in some sort of cooperative agreement, of course. I think that it may seem, depending on the organization and their experience with renewable diesel, it may be a big step. But I think it depends on people's comfort level. So I guess my question is, and this is just for like the whole group and people based on people's experience with renewable diesel, how do we get people to having that comfort level of going into a cooperative agreement, right? Let's say somebody isn't necessarily, super familiar with renewable diesel. They've been eyeing it for a while, but they really want to try it, or they've tried it and they just want to make the next step. Is it getting advice on how to budget for capital, various things like that? Because it's a really great thing, but some people are just close to getting there, and it's like, how do we bridge that gap? And then a second thing I was just going to mention is school buses could be great candidates for renewable diesel. They're used every day. And even if they're not necessarily have the budget for a EV school bus. I know there's some grants out there for EV school buses, but renewable diesel could be a good option for them as well. So
That's a great point, Mac. And I'll just maybe say too, there's a lot of funding for replacing existing diesel vehicles. So if you've got diesels that are using renewable diesel, that doesn't eliminate, that unit from being eligible for future diesel to diesel replacement funding. But a lot of this discussion has been maybe somewhat more locally focused. I want to think a little bit more broadly. John mentioned, what does this regional group that we've been convening all this time need to move forward? Do other folks have questions? We've had kind of a very Vermont focused discussion here. Do other folks in Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, the ski areas, I'm thinking the transit agencies, do you have questions? You're hearing about all these discussions going on. What more do you need moving forward to maybe help you kind of get on board and raise your hand for a local discussion?
Hey y'all, it's Peter from Connecticut. I think from our perspective, being not a low carbon fuel standard state with very high goals, I think it's about reopening that conversation because this carbon goals are going to be the driving force for any kind of market in our states, right? Our legislatures kind of are understanding that we're not going to hit any of our aggressive goals, right? Especially without funding. So just on that level, we had a successful pilot with Yale, right? But Yale is a very big corporation that can afford those kinds of things, right? So finding a stakeholder like that is extremely helpful. But on the other end, opening up that conversation with the state, and I think our state is still focused on just doing a little bit on electrification, and they're going to get to the point where they realize they need renewable diesel, but it's still about getting them there, right, in an education aspect.
That's a solid point, Peter. Focusing on those goals. I know New Hampshire does not have a low carbon fuel standard goal, and so that can sometimes present a challenge, right? Because it's really a voluntary approach. So
well, yeah, we have goals, just no funding, so it's
yeah, flip of the coin. So what do you think, folks? The cooperative purchasing agreement, moving forward with a pilot. What are we missing for other states to jump on this? As Max says, what's holding you back? Is there a fear?
Sorry, I'm not on camera, just feeling a little sick today, but I can speak on behalf of New York State. The cold weather operability is still something we run into frequently. We're working with our state energy office to do a study. I think the request for proposals closes tomorrow. So hopefully, that will get rolled out this year. But is that for any of the other northern states? Is that something you've kind of looked into or been able to assuage those concerns?
Anyone want to speak to that? You raised a great point, Kevin.
Cold weather operability is the name of the game here. So someone asked, I forget who, in the chat about any results we had from Massport's renewable diesel this winter because it's been exceedingly cold. I don't have any information, but I will reach out and see any data they have and can share with the group. But that's a concern for all of us. I don't know, Jesse, Tyrion, if you have any comments. Sorry, I hate to put you on the spot from Montana.
No, that's fine. I think that's probably the number one or number two question we get is how does it work in the winter? And it's like any fuel, you have to predict what's going to happen. If you can anticipate the cold weather coming, you think about blending with other fuels. A lot of fleets do that with number one diesel. You blend number one with number two when it's cold. So I think it also depends on the source of the renewable diesel. Different renewable diesel has different cold flow properties. So just working with a fuel provider who can assure you that they'll keep the fuel flowing. And so you can be safe by just running 10% in everything. Also, 5% runs better in cold weather than 100% petroleum diesel. So that's one way you could do it. Let's run 5% in everything, and it'll already be better than any petroleum diesel you can run already. And that's a way to ease into it, and that's what I would suggest. You don't want to scare people by risking any kind of gelling problems in the cold weather. So just lower the blend to where it's a super safe level, and it's pretty easy to do the math and do the testing ahead of time to make sure that you don't have gelling issues.
Jesse, this is Lou again. I think you were asking two questions at the same time. One is, where does the Northeast grouping, the activity that's been going on for the last year, go? And then there's the question of what do the locals do? Thought that I have is for the next year, the Northeast group gets together, not open as big as this, smaller groups, and but the local groups get together and put together what are their issues, and so that you narrow down the discussion. Right now with the people online, I suspect we're all preaching to the choir to a good extent. And we let the local groups serve the function of bringing more people into the crowd. If you continue to have a group like this, and you all of a sudden, for Vermont, I would like to think we would have everybody that had a snow area involved in the discussion at some lower level. You don't want to have all those people on this kind of a group.
Makes sense. Now, I think I saw someone else with a hand raised, and I know we're getting close to the bottom of the hour here where we transition. So just want to make sure that we give everybody a chance to talk.
Yeah, Steve, looks like Steve Dodge looked like you had your hand up.
I did, and I'll be real quick. I question what Jesse just said. Not that I question Jesse, but I don't know if he was talking about biodiesel or RD when he was talking about lowering the blends to 20%, because there's a big difference, and I just don't want people to get confused. But
yeah, I wasn't talking about bio at all. We don't really talk about that much anymore, at least over in Montana.
Okay.
But some studies I presented on in the past have shown that 5% renewable and 95% petroleum has better cold flow properties than 100% petroleum with all the additives in it. So just that alone, I think, is a great spot for people to start. And I think that also reduces the premium people are paying. So it's a real easy entry. People can get comfortable with 5%. Soon they can get comfortable with 10% and go from there. That's the at least approach I'm taking here. I'm kind of jealous where you guys have these townships and states who are actually interested. We have the opposite. And I was trying to learn and how I could get Montana to maybe do a state purchase of this fuel. But it's a very different mentality here.
Thanks, Jesse. Appreciate that.
Yeah, and I think what I'm hearing here too is there are still questions, there are common concerns, there are some common interests that are percolating to the surface here. What I'm going to recommend for folks to do after this call is if you want to be looped into any kind of future RD discussions or connecting with other renewable diesel interested folks in your state, reach out to your local Clean Cities director. Each state here in the Northeast has one, so please make sure you do. As to where this group goes from here, I think I've mentioned funding is running out, so there would need to be future funding to kind of convene at a larger scale, unless someone is willing to step up on that. So I think we'd all love to hear, especially Peggy and John would love to hear from folks that are maybe interested in convening or leading for their specific state or on a regional level as well.
Yeah,
So,
thanks, Jessica. We can sort of start to close out and wrap up from there. As we are coming to the end of the quarterly working group session, we're still trying to navigate how we might continue to convene this group, continue conversations at the regional level, but also start to dive into more of those state-specific conversations in those smaller groups. Really looking at like if there are opportunities for group procurement, what that process would look like, who are the partners that would need to be involved, all of those good things. So a few things, I'll just cover a few quick takeaways and then I'll leave you all sort of with some next steps on our end and hoping that we can still all stay connected through this work. But some of the takeaways that I took from this conversation was really looking for partners to form partnerships rather than just being a fuel distributor provider. Partnerships for the long haul, exploring to really explore those pilot opportunities and group procurement options. Maybe there's opportunities to tie into the sustainable aviation fuel markets. Sounds like there's a lot of opportunity growing there in the Massachusetts region. Sophia shared that MassDEC's developing an RD policy guidance document, and as soon as that is published and released, we will share that all with the group. Make sure that that gets out to you all. We talked about looking at overall state usage, diesel usage, and can we bring enough partners together to capture 5, 10% of diesel fuel for the state, really trying to capture that market share. And then another helpful tip is really framing renewable diesel against other alternative fuels for your fleets. Really looking at it as one of those suite of options rather than comparing it as a one-to-one to petroleum diesel. And then, some of the things to keep top of mind are some of those cold weather operability concerns that folks may have. Jesse was just talking about some of the benefits actually, and we can do some work on the back end to highlight some of those considerations with cold weather climates. That's obviously top of mind for any folks that are anywhere near New England. And then, yeah, sort of really leading or narrowing down from this regional context to those local conversations is where we're hoping to go next. So a few things are we're going to work on pulling together sort of like a master slide deck, which includes information from all 4 sessions that we'll publish and make available for folks to look back at and reference. It'll include some information from previous presenters. We'll sort of make a package out of it. I'll also share that these sessions are uploaded on the Vermont Clean Communities YouTube channel. So we'll send out links to those once we upload this final session. Folks can continue to rewatch that. And then we will either send out some sort of survey or some sort of process to really understand who's ready to take that next step. We sent out a midpoint survey to see what fleets were potentially interested and got some data collected on where they're operating and how many gallons of diesel that their total fleet uses. Looking to sort of take the next step further with all of that and move folks along in the process. And as always, reach out to your Clean Cities director if you're interested in continuing conversations, connecting with any of the partners that have been involved in this process. we will send out contact information for all of the directors in the New England states, as well as a link to all the folks that have been involved. Yeah, go ahead, Jesse.
I'll just take this chance to plug my own thing. So
Please do,
next
yeah.
Wednesday is our monthly renewable diesel working group. We thought we were going to end it after 3 years, but I found some private funding to help it keep going through the rest of the year. So that'll be next Wednesday at 2 p.m. We have a ski resort from Denver who's going to talk about their pilot study and what that revealed. And you guys are all welcome to come and share. We can actually divert some of the discussion to East Coast stuff because it pertains to all of us. So I invite everybody to come there.
Yeah, and we've been to several of those meetings. They're awesome. And Jesse is very knowledgeable about the fuel, which is always great. So yeah, we'll stay connected with you all, and we'll sort of outline a pathway forward that we can all participate in the region, and hopefully start to dive down deeper into those state-specific conversations. So thank you again for everybody who has participated in this process. It's been really exciting to see folks from New England and beyond join this conversation.
Yeah, thank you all. Special thanks to the National Lab of the Rockies, formerly NREL, for the funding to support this group.
Yeah, and thank you to all of our partners that have helped guide some of these conversations, all the fuel suppliers and distributors, and all of those folks that have really helped inform, our understanding of renewable diesel in the Northeast and some of the logistics behind it. So I know a lot of you have been on this call today and have joined several of our sessions in the past. So we just want to extend a huge thank you to everybody that's been involved in this process. And with that, I will adjourn us. So thank you everyone for being here, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Thanks.